Hey you guys, it's Miss Arneson. It's been a long time since I've made a video, but I wanted to have this definition and information about adaptation for lesson 2 up online for those of you who need to make it up. So an adaptation is a word that I have to go over a lot in science classes because we use the word adapt in regular life all the time, and it means kind of the same thing, but the importances of the differences are vast. And so we really need to check those out. Here's a little comic by one of my favorite comics called Gary Larson. And the zebras are all hanging out together except for the one that got eaten by the lion. So I just think that's funny, and we're going to talk a little bit about zebras, so I put that on there. In regular life, we use the word adaptation, and you should write this down, to address something like adjusting to a situation through your choices. So when you say, I adapted, you're saying you willfully did something. You did it on purpose. And so if you, for example, had bad grades and your parents took away your phone, you would have to adapt to that situation through your choices to get your cell phone back. So there's a couple of ways you could do that. If you had not been attending school, you could show up more often. You could pay attention. You could actually put in your effort into class, or you could do the assignments that your teacher allows you to do that you hadn't done yet. So those would be adaptations in regular life, things that you choose to change to adjust to a situation that you face. And in nature, it's a lot less like that. So humans kind of break a lot of biological rules and we kind of like do our own thing in a lot of ways. No other species has created computers like we have. So we're different. And so we kind of have our own version of adaptation that we use. But in nature, when we're talking about evolution, we're going to be talking about things that have to do with evolutionary fitness. So whenever I say adaptation in biology, I'm not going to be talking about the choice of an animal. Please write down the definition of fitness. Fitness is an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. You should underline reproduce because that's really the most important part. You have to be able to pass your genes on to offspring. So if you survive, but you don't have any kids, then you're not evolutionarily successful. You don't have enough fitness or adaptations. Here are 3 organisms that all have adaptations that make them fit or able to survive and reproduce in the areas where they live. Obviously, if you took a polar bear and you stuck it into the desert where a camel would normally live, it wouldn't be very successful because it's not adapted to that environment. So let's talk about adaptations the way that they can happen in biology. So you can have a genetic adaptation. Genetic adaptations happen when, and you should write this down, happen when a mutation increases fitness. When a mutation, a change in DNA that's a mistake, makes an organism more able to pass on its genes because it survives and it reproduces, then we call that a genetic adaptation because it happens in the genes and then it shows up in the traits. This is a really famous example, the Galapagos finches. When Darwin was traveling in the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that there were a bunch of different finches and all of them were very closely related, but the differences that they had were related to what they eat. And so if they eat mainly seeds, then they would have these thicker beaks that were made for crunching those seeds. If they were feeding on insects, then they might have these pointier beaks because they have to feed like by getting the insects out of tree bark or whatever. And so while he was doing this, and then some of them eat cactus, so you have to have a pretty intense beak to be getting through all of the needles of the cactus. So he noticed that all of these changes were related to what they eat. And so his hypothesis, which we've then tested through DNA, and it's totally right, is that there were these original finches, and then they started branching off into these different groups depending on what they were eating. So it's not like a bird is like, hey, I wish I had a bigger beak because then I could crack seeds easier. That's not the way evolution works. A beak would randomly be bigger because of a genetic mutation, but if that gets passed on to offspring, and then those offspring have more offspring, then over many generations, you get this big honking beak over here to crack seeds. The other type of adaptation is going to be a behavioral adaptation. And these ones I think are this kind of is confusing because you're like, well, it's a behavior, it's a choice, but in animals don't really have that much choice of behaviors like as far as fun. There are some great apes and some dolphins and stuff that seem to do things just for fun, but for the most part, animals and plants are focused on surviving and reproducing. So behavioral adaptations happen when organisms in a population behave a way that makes them more fit. So we recently had some rains in Las Cruces, and I was at Memoria's boyfriend's house, and he has some pecan orchard, and there were all these little green frogs that were out in the orchard because they do something called estivation. That's like hibernation when bears go and like sleep all winter. Estivation is when you hide underground and basically like dry out, and you're waiting for moisture, you're waiting for the rain. And so these frogs all came out because it had rained. That is an example of a behavior that they do. But it's not like one frog's like, I think I'm just going to stick it out and just not estivate this year. No, they just do it as part of their instincts. That's what they do to survive and reproduce. Penguins huddle together in groups because they can stay warm that way. And zebras huddle together in groups. So here's those zebras, because then the lion has a hard time figuring out where one zebra starts and the other one ends. So if you look at this kind of right here, you can tell the two zebras apart because you have nice human eyes. But when it comes over here, this is like a big blob of zebras, and it's much harder to tell them apart. That's a behavioral adaptation and a physical adaptation too. The stripes is their physical or genetic adaptation because they don't behave to have stripes. They just have traits that are stripes. And then their behavior is to hang out in a group so that they're harder for any lion to eat. So I hope that helps clear up the difference between behavioral adaptations and genetic ones, and further that it helps you make sense of the fact that the way we use adaptation as a word in everyday life is different than when we use it in science. Hope you have a great day.